maybe we should start with a little bit of budget flavour. Rachel Reeves telling us about her tax rises, and then former Prime Minister, now leader of the opposition, Rishi Sunak, fighting back.
The scale and seriousness of the situation that we have inherited cannot be underestimated. Together, the hole in our public finances this year, which recurs every year, the compensation schemes that they did not fund, and their failure to assess the scale of the challenges facing our public services means that this budget raises taxes by £40 billion.
They said they wouldn't fiddle the figures. They have. They said they wouldn't increase borrowing. They have. They said they wouldn't raise taxes on working people. They have.
So there we are. Quite. Did you enjoy watching this budget?
Well, I didn't like any of the measures, as you can imagine. Because this is tax and spend. Even The Guardian have said this is a return to tax and spend. And my fundamental problem with it is if you raise the taxes in year one of the government and they don't get the growth in, let's say, the next 2 or 3 years, they'll come back for more and they'll have to raise taxes more to cover the increased costs, because there's no appetite to reduce spending.
I should just point out that the last government, of which you are a member, had a massive tax rise.
Yeah, we did. And I didn't like it.
To pay for a big rise in public spending.
That's right.
So, I mean, that was what Rishi Sunak did when he was Chancellor.
But the issue there was that it was a specific circumstance, which was the COVID-19 pandemic. And you will remember that we spent something like £300 billion extra to support businesses and to support the economy. It was a once-in-a-100-year
But Rachel Reeves
phenomenon.
would say this is a once-in-a-parliament reset, wouldn't she? And she said that part of the reason is that black hole, the mess that the Tories have left public services. And in order to redress that, and it's a gamble, I think that's a word that's been floating around, that people feel quickly enough the benefits in terms of public services and the National Health Service. And it's a gamble because we need to see growth, which currently is not looking good.
But the issue that I have with it is that in order to get growth, you need to encourage private enterprise. And what they've done, and I totally understand why she had to do this, because there were enough pledges on not raising tax for working people, however you define that. And if you're not going to tax individuals, which is understandable, you're going to have to raise money, you're going to have to tax businesses. And by God, they did that in spades. So you've got a situation where of the 40 billion, 25 billion, so that's 62.5%, 25 billion of that is being raised directly from employers on their national insurance. And the problem I've got with that is that what employers will do, they will either put those costs through in terms of the goods they're selling, which will add to inflation, or they will try and suppress workers' wages in order to make the ends meet and pay the tax. So this is highly risky.
Which is what the OBR says.
Which is exactly what the OBR said. And if, for whatever reason, you don't get growth... And, you know, we've lived through very turbulent times. And a lot of the things that the government are responsible for, they should own. But there are other things that can happen in the world which will blow them off course.
You know what it's like to have a turbulent reaction to a budget.
Oh, yes.
I mean, actually, yesterday, the financial market reaction to Rachel Reeves' budget was pretty mild compared to what you experienced.
So the big difference...
Why do you think the financial markets are giving her a bigger tick?
So what they did, which we didn't do, was that they had 4 months where they trailed pretty much everything that was going to be in the budget. They, you know, everyone... There was nothing... There was no surprises in there. The mistake we made was that we went too fast and we just announced a whole bunch of stuff that the market hadn't even thought of. And there was that adverse reaction.
So
you've got to prepare
you think it could have settled down and it could have worked still?
No, we should have... I've said this repeatedly, but we should have taken longer to do as they've done. I mean, they took 4 months, which is probably maybe a bit too long. We announced our budget, I think, within 2.5 weeks, which was, in my view, looking back, it's easy to, with hindsight, to say this, was too short a time.
So, Jonathan, looking at the decisions made yesterday, it is true businesses have been hit very hard and there will be a cost to that. And despite the fact that, you know, there aren't taxes on wage slips that will be felt, there's not income tax, it will be felt by working people, won't it?
Well, the Chancellor had to get the money from somewhere. So my colleagues and my old colleagues who I used to work with now sit in the Cabinet. They were genuinely shocked when they got into government at the state of the public finances. The promises that had been made on the Never Never, the the IOUs that had not been paid, and they felt that they had to take some tough decisions to stabilise the public finances. That's why we've seen this big tax increase. Rachel Reeves will not want to come back in a further budget and make further huge tax increases.
Although she hasn't ruled it out.
Well, no, because no Chancellor can predict the future, and that's her being responsible. But she won't want to come back and make further tax increases. But I think, for me, the most important thing for the budget is the NHS investment. I'm passionate about the NHS. I've been on your programme gazillions of times talking about the NHS. Yeah. It is a big level of investment going into the National Health Service. And, my God, it is needed. The waiting lists in the NHS, I mean, they're so big. You can probably see them from the moon, they're so big. Yeah. But this now is a big challenge for the government, for my friend Wes Streeting. They've got to make sure that every penny piece of that is spent well.
So she did say to Robert Preston, didn't she, last night? She did say that people will see a change in those waiting lists. They'll be able to get appointments and delivery on surgeries they've been waiting for more easily, because that's the reality of waiting lists coming down. Within a year, crikey, is what I say to that. That's quite a big statement. But I guess she has to say it, because you can't have the pain without some sense of gain.
Absolutely.
Well, the investment has gone in, but there's also got to be reforms. Now, I first came to work in Westminster with Ed and others like 25 years ago. In them days, we all had pagers. Do any of you use a pager now? No. They do in the NHS. They still use fax machines. There's a whole programme of reforms
use a lot of mobile.
you can bring into the National Health Service to bring it up to date. And that's what Wes Streeting is talking about, moving it from analogue to digital. That's really, really important.
So that's where the biggest risk is, because, of course, you know, we put quite a bit of money, contrary to what Labour said, we put a lot of money into the NHS, but the issue we had was getting better outputs. So it's not just about the money you spend. I mean, if you look over COVID, we put billions and billions into it, but people on the front line have to feel that the service has improved. And if it hasn't, I think the government will be in a very difficult position.
Can I just go back to this this tax point in the OBR? Because, you know, the Chancellor says, you were saying there, Jonathan, that ministers found out how bad things were when they went into government. But you knew before the election that the public spending plans for the NHS and public services were too low, and the big increase in public spending, you knew that was going to be needed. Office of Budget Responsibility say of that employers' national insurance tax rise, they say 60% of the higher costs will be passed on to workers and consumers via lower wages and higher prices, leaving 40% to be absorbed by the employer in lower post-tax profits. So most of the employer's national insurance rise is going to be paid by workers in lower wages. That is working people bearing an extra burden for something, more investment in the NHS, which you knew was needed before the election.
It kind of feels like you colluded in the fantasy in order to get that blessed Ming vase across the line. Do you know what I mean? You kind of feared it was bad, but we're just going to have to not warn of how bad it's going to be until after the election. So that's why people feel let down.
Well, I mean, the first thing, if you are imposing £40 billion worth of tax increases, £25 billion on one particular tax, and then other tax increases from the, you know, the VAT changes for schools or whatever, look, there's no way of that not, you know, having an impact on people. That is just the nature of
it is going to impact on working people's wages.
That is the nature of a huge tax increase. But what it
we
isn't,
were being told 2 days ago it wasn't going to impact.
But the commitment that the Labour Party made at the general election, and the point I was making in these TV studios, or at least down the line, and you know, from the other studios in the general election campaign, is that our tax promises related to individuals. It related to the national insurance,
and that's why,
and income tax and VAT.
You're 100% right, and that's why they had to go to businesses. So there are other things which I didn't approve of at all. I mean, I mean, this is unpopular to say this, but the energy profits levy, I think, is, you know, the windfall tax. They've increased that and extended that. And I think the danger of that is that people will not want to invest, God forbid, in the North Sea, and essentially will be more reliant on imported
But, you know, there's going to be a behavioural reaction, isn't there, from everything you hit anybody with.
That's right.
So the risk, we know, is that business, if you increase any kind of taxation or levy on it, it'll put them off. They'll go elsewhere.
That's one.
But the flip side is if you hit working people, then the people that put you in power will be really upset as well. In a way, has she made terrible everyday sexism there? has she made the right call in this instance?
So just very briefly, it's not just a question of the businesses being hurt. As Ed said, a lot of the businesses, they've got power. They can charge they can pay wages, and they can also increase their prices.
Yeah.
And that's the risk, is that 60%, according to the OBR, of the impact will be borne by consumers buying goods and employees earning slightly lower wages.
But hang on, right. For years, our National Health Service has suffered from chronic underinvestment by historic standards. We have schools across the country which are crumbling and collapsing. Our transport infrastructure, particularly in the north, is woeful. And this budget has announced billions of pounds extra for the NHS, that's a good thing. It's announced more money for schools, that's a good thing. It's announced better transport links, like the Pennine links, which links up Leeds to Huddersfield to Manchester. We're going to go ahead, full steam ahead on that.
It's also put the cost of bus pass up by 2-3 pounds, and people will feel that straight away.
But there's £1 billion extra going into bus services, which will mean more bus routes, particularly in the north and the Midlands. So this does have to be paid for, but for years we have had a public realm which is hacked away, and we need good public services.
Look, we've had comments on both sides, just for our viewers already. One, supporting your feeling about people wanting the public services to be better and will take some pain for that. Nick saying, I watched the budget yesterday and for the first time in a long time, I felt there was light at the end of the tunnel. The country's been tied in knots and I felt like someone was trying to loosen the knots. I really need public services to get better. And then lower down here, the flip side, which you would expect, just slightly lost it. We're a family business trading for more than 100 years. The rate of NI increase and threshold decrease will cost in excess of 100k. This is kind of, a disaster for our an extinction-level disaster for our business.
Yeah, it'll be challenging for lots of businesses. And also,
that's more than challenging for those people, though, isn't it? And that's going to have an impact.
Sure, and George Osborne, when he was Chancellor, we used to call the NI increase a jobs tax, which effectively it is, because what you're doing is you're increasing the cost to employers of employing people.
Yeah.
And that could potentially have an adverse effect on the economy.
So how does that be borne over the coming weeks and months? Because there will be employers watching just as their employees. How does that get borne, Jonathan?
But the National Health Service, right, not only is it bad for you as an individual, that you cannot get your treatment on time, that for any parent watching who has sat in an A&E with their poorly child for hours knows it is bedlam. Or any parent who tries to get a GP appointment on a Monday morning and you have to ring, sometimes hundreds of times. Everybody knows that the National Health Service needs fixing. But it's not just about those individuals who are ill. We've got 2.8 million people out of work for reasons of sickness. But that is a block on economic growth as well.
But let's go to the big uncertainty, the big question for this whole Parliament now, because we've talked about the National Health Service. It needs to improve. Rachel Reeves says it's going to improve with the extra money. But the other thing we've talked about a lot is the cost of living crisis. Now, the OBR say, at the moment, growth is going to stay weak. The economy is not going to grow strongly. In fact, they say, Paul Johnson of the IFS was pointing this out last night, that at the moment, on the basis of these numbers, this is the second worst Parliament for rising living standards since the Second World War. The only one which was worse was the last Parliament. So, for Labour, this gamble, as you said, Kate, on borrowing more, spending more, raising taxes, is it going to lead to growth which is stronger? Will we see living standards start to rise? Or in 3 years' time, are we going to still be talking about families suffering a cost of living crisis which is ongoing? Because isn't that the thing which is going to determine whether this budget is seen as a success?
So, if I may, the whole issue on which this hangs is growth. Because we're obviously, I think we should spend more on the NHS. But the only way, if we're not growing, we have to raise it through taxes. What we should be doing is growing the economy and getting bigger taxes.
But Labour say they want to do that as well. I don't think anybody disagrees that growth is good.
But that's where, and the OBR revised down, as you said, for 26, 27, 28. I think at the last 2 years it's 1.5%. My fear is that we won't even get to the 1.5%. If anything happens between now and 2026, a global recession or whatever it might be, you'll be in a situation where the Chancellor will have to come back to the House of Commons and announce further tax rises.
So, Jonathan, is this going to be a Parliament where people will feel better off than the last Parliament? Are things going to get better in terms of growth in the economy and people's living standards because of this budget?
Well, obviously, you've quoted what the OBR is pointing to. I mean, this is the challenge for Labour, is that it's got to get a sense that it has shifted the economy. The economy has turned around. So the think tank that I now run, Labour Together, has done a whole load of polling. And the two things that voters want this Labour government to deliver on is the National Health Service, and I'm pretty confident it's got a plan on that. And I understand the NHS, and I think the money going into the NHS, so long as it's back to public reform, will begin to see results. The second thing is, though, the cost of living and the general sense that things are easing, and that is going to be the challenge. And I think this government is going to have to be watching these growth figures really, really carefully, and he's going to have to continually be thinking about the initiatives from planning reforms to skills investments to welfare reforms to get growth motoring.
So that's
going to be
where
a big
you
question.
see the wiggle room, if you like. If you don't want to go back and ask for more tax, but you have to ensure the growth. Because at the moment, we're just at the rolling of the dice stage, aren't we? You know, is that where the wiggle room is for further dice to be rolled?
Well, look, this government wants to reform the planning rules, which can get very complicated. But the point being is that we're not very good at building houses and infrastructure projects in this country. We need to get better. If they can get those planning reforms through, I think that will contribute to our growth.
So then we get more things built, more homes.
Yeah.
But then isn't the worry that those building companies won't be able to employ the same people because they're paying more national insurance?
That's an issue. I mean, and I think that if you're going to have a growth strategy, I agree with the planning, actually. We didn't do enough on that, because we were always worried about what, backbenchers were going to say about, people building homes across lovely countryside. But I think you've got to get the country building, and I agree with the government on that. But the converse of that is, if you're going to have a growth strategy which is going to clobber business to the tune of 25 billion, that doesn't make sense to me. I mean, I've always been somebody who believes in private enterprise and private business. The person that mentioned the small family business, that should be the engine. That is the engine of the British economy.
Let's cut to the ideological divide between the two of you. If you take the budget yesterday, no tax rise on working people, action on mine workers' pensions.
Absolutely, that's a
1p cut in beer.
1p
cut in beer. On the other side, a big inheritance tax rise for family farms, over £1 million, 35,000 fewer children in private schools because of private school fees, increasing in capital gains tax. Kwasi, you said last weekend that you thought this budget was going to be a class war budget. Yeah. And my question is, it's actually in a way to Jonathan first, is that what Rachel Reeves wants? Has she decided she wants to pit working people against the rich, the powerful, private schools, farmers? Is her strategy to pick a class fight?
No, I don't think this is class war, not remotely. That is not Rachel Reeves's temperament or approach. What I think she's trying to do is rebuild public services. She thinks by investing in infrastructure and housing and these big transport projects in the north, she thinks in the end that will help grow the economy and make our economy more productive. I'm glad, by the way, you mentioned the mine workers' pension scheme, because this is a small technical change, but will benefit retired miners and their spouses in a lot of what is now called the red wall areas of Castleford, of Mansfield, of Wigan. It's a small change, but it's going to make a big difference to a group of people.
But
so
your point about the farms...
When she picks out air passenger duty on private flights and makes a joke about Rishi Sunak flying to California, the politics of this is she wants a class war fight.
Yeah, but I mean, very few of us use private jets. I mean, I just want to make that very clear. But I don't think she sets out saying we're going to have a class war. I think that would be.
You said last week, and that's what she was.
But that's effectively what it is.
So she doesn't want it.
She doesn't want it, but she's been forced by circumstances because of the growth situation, because of the so-called black hole. And I question it. There was 9 billion, not the 20 billion that they said, because we hadn't allocated money to help the post office.
But the OBR have challenged the revelations, haven't they, on that?
Yeah,
we'll talk to Jeremy Hunt,
they've been basically in the middle. Between what the Tory front bench is saying and what the government is saying, the OBR are kind of in the middle.
Because they're independent and being sensible.
But Labour are exaggerating on that. But what I wanted to say was that I think the effect of taxing businesses, taxing private schools, taxing farms, is a tax on aspiration. And a lot of those people have worked very hard. The people who've run the family business for 100 years, yes, they've inherited.
I mean, the farms thing is interesting. Actually, we were talking about this, and you made, as usual, brilliant points, because people look at £1 million of inheritance and think, crikey, that's a lot. Nobody gets that. But when it comes to farms that might just be breaking even, £1 million worth of land... Actually, and suddenly the family business is out of business.
We've all been in the Treasury where you have a measure which, when it's written down, looks sensible.
Yeah.
And then when you actually start to see the case studies, you think, well, that wasn't what really intended.
Yeah.
Family farms struggling to make ends meet, don't want to sell the home and the land. It's over £1 million.
And also, a lot of these farms
hit with a big tax.
will have been farmed by the same people for generations.
Quite.
And they wouldn't have had those tax.
It rang. I bet Jonathan, sitting in the House in the chamber, when that one was announced, did you sort of slightly wonder? I hope they've worked out the detail of that one.
Well, I wasn't sat in the chamber.
He was sat on his sofa thinking, thank God I'm not in the chamber properly.
Right, he's out.
The good people of Leicester South.
You should be.
I don't sit in the chamber, but I get to sit here instead. So,
cool.
Look,
is it ringing a bit of an alarm bell? This family farms thing.
Well, look, there's lots of. It's these more technical tax changes.
Yeah.
Pasties, caravan...
These more technical tax changes...
which can all go wrong.
Which always get people... There'll be somebody out there who'll be asking questions about these more technical tax changes, and I'm sure there'll be an ongoing debate. By the way, on this part about the cost of living, it's worth pointing out that millions of low-paid workers were also given a pay rise by Rachel Reeves, and that is a good thing. You may call that class war, I don't know, but I think it's fairness that low-paid workers
are getting
a good pay rise.
Increase, way above inflation.
Kwasi used to oppose the minimum wage, but he doesn't anymore.
That was a long time ago.
It's a long time ago.
About 25 years ago.
One other thing the budget we should ask you about, Kwasi, is Tory leadership.
Oh, yes.
I know it's not on the top of the agenda today, probably in your mind, but have you picked a leader?
I would never say...
OK.
If I had.
Could you say if you've decided yet?
Because I think they're both very good candidates and they're both personal friends and I think they've both got great strengths and, like all of us, they've got weaknesses.
Crikey, that was the most extraordinary politician's answer. I can't say who I voted for and I can't even tell you if I have voted.
No, hang on.
Today's the last day.
OK, so you'll be doing it today?
You have voted?
I am about to vote.
Oh, Oh, go on, listen. Just between us. Just between us.
I'll whisper it in your ear. I think Kemi and Rob are excellent candidates. Both excellent candidates. I'm not going to say.
Is there one you'd be a little bit more disappointed if they didn't win?
So I've been in contact with both of them in the last week.
Right.
One a phone call, one on WhatsApp, and I wish success for both.
Holy moly. Jonathan, marks out of 10 for evasiveness there. Was that brilliantly done?
I'm not going to destroy my friendships on
Good Morning Britain.
No.
No.
Have you drafted a letter to both of them saying, congratulations, I always supported you?
No, congratulations on your victory. I never doubted you would win. And I now stand ready to be your shadow foreign secretary in your new shadow cabinet. We can see it all, Kwasi.
Just leave it blank and fill the names in when the results are done. Brilliant. OK. All right. Thanks very much indeed. Thank you. Oh, very quickly, very quickly. Halloween. Stickers or sweets for trick or treat? Sweets all the way for Kwasi, Jonathan?
I mean, my kids would go balmy at me. Sweets.
Sweets every time.
Stickers?
Yeah.
Who are these surgeons? What are they on?
We're debating this later. I'm sort of wondering who is going to be defending stickers, but...
You.
Me? Oh, God. I'm always in the underdog's corner, aren't I?
You're giving up marmalade.
Thank you very much indeed.